Welcome back to my channel. My name is Kyle Reaume. I am a filmmaker, I'm a teacher, and I like to talk about franchises with a mixed legacy. Shout out to this comment on my video, Let's Nitpick Every Harry Potter Movie. I wish I cared about Harry Potter to fully enjoy this, but sure, I'll sit through 40 minutes of Kyle talking about something he's passionate about. Aww. Today, we are talking about a very contentious franchise. But first, a word from our sponsor. Do you like binge watching TV shows and movies? Of course you do, that's why you're here. But I know that if you're anything like me, sometimes you feel a little disappointed by the selections that you get with things like Netflix or even some of the stuff that you see on YouTube. That's why I love using ExpressVPN so much. With ExpressVPN, you can get unfettered access to all parts of the internet, including videos that are geo-blocked in certain countries. See how if you go to my channel and you look at it through the USA, you can only see a few of my older videos? Well, if you were to change your ExpressVPN location to something like, let's say, Canada, then you would get access to everything. And there is a lot of geo-blocked content in Canada, so ExpressVPN just really changes the game for me. Find out how you can get 3 months free by clicking the link in the description box below, and here is the handy URL. That's expressvpn.com/Kyle Reaume, R-E-A-U-M-E. Go to that link and find out how you can get 3 months free. Today we are going to be talking about the Matrix franchise. So let's do it. Let's talk about each of the films. Let's talk about what the critical and cultural perception was at the time. And then let's talk about the critical and cultural perception of this franchise now. The Matrix was a trilogy franchise, with the first film being released in March 1999. The Matrix Reloaded was released May 15th, 2003, and the final film, The Matrix Revolutions, was released on November 5th, 2003. The sheer volume of discourse and subsequent conjecture about this franchise is practically unparalleled. Ask any random person what their thoughts about the Matrix franchise are, and you're gonna get a real mixed bag. In this video essay, I want to talk about not only the films as individuals, but I want to talk about the shifting cultural perception of the franchise as a whole. Keep in mind that the last film, The Matrix Revolution, was released in 2003, so it's been 18 years since the franchise has ended, and there are some shifting perspectives on it. So, let's take it from the top. The Matrix was released in 1999. This film stars our hero Neo. He's a hacker, he deals viruses to people on mescaline.
You ever have that feeling where you're not sure if you're awake or still dreaming?
All the time. It's called mescaline.
He helps his landlady take out her garbage.
And you help your landlady carry out her garbage.
And he's on the constant search for the truth.
It's the question that drives us, Neo. It's the question that brought you here.
What is the Matrix?
His name is also an anagram for one. I don't know if that's something that you noticed as a kid. Another kid pointed it out to me when I was 12, and I was like, oh, the levels that this film operates on. In the film, Neo discovers that his world is not the world that he thinks it is, but rather that he and the rest of humanity are trapped, living in a fictional reality run by the machines to use their bodies as a source of energy. He finds out that the real rest of humanity lives in a small underground city known as Zion. We don't actually see Zion in the first film, but we do see quite a lot of it in 2 and 3. However, everyone who's freed from the Matrix also has the ability to plug back in. When one plugs back into the Matrix and learns about the looseness of the rules in that world, well, then they're able to do things like jujitsu, and they're able to just program them into their head. So you just jack it into your head, and then you're all like,
Let's go.
Will Smith famously turned down this role. He was offered the role back in the day in the 90s, and he turned it down for a couple reasons. One, he said that it was a little too hard for him to wrap his mind around. He actually did a recent video about it on YouTube where he talked about how he wasn't really completely sold on the Wachowskis' approach with their pitch.
So dude, we're thinking like imagine you're in a fight and then you like jump. Imagine if you could stop jumping. the middle of the jump.
Sam, say that again?
Now, I can understand that, but I think we can all agree that he probably regrets that now. Because also it's worth noting that when they were considering Will Smith to be Neo, they were then considering Val Kilmer to be Morpheus. I really think they made the right call. I already knew about Will Smith being approached for the role and turning it down, but in doing research for this video, I also learned about some other pretty interesting casting options. Brad Pitt and Leonardo DiCaprio were also approached for the role of Neo, and I gotta say, I don't think they would have been the right fit. But recently, Sandra Bullock said that she was also offered the role, and that the Wachowskis said if she was willing to accept it, they would rewrite the role of Neo to be a woman for Sandra Bullock. Sandra Bullock even went so far to say that it's one of the few roles that she regrets not taking. Now, upon learning this information, I'm really thinking about what kind of a franchise this would have been with Sandra Bullock as the star. I'm really trying to imagine Sandra Bullock in head-to-toe leather with the glasses and like machine guns. Honestly, the more I learn about the multi-universe castings that could have happened, the more I'm so glad that we got the cast that we did. I love Keanu Reeves. I love Carrie-Anne Moss. I love Lawrence Fishburne. It's a really well-rounded cast, and I'm so glad that those three are in all of them. If you're a big fan of the John Wick movies, then you can thank the existence of The Matrix for that, because the director of the first John Wick movie, Chad Stahelski, was actually Keanu Reeves' stunt double on the Matrix films. Because of that, when Chad Stahelski was putting together John Wick, that's how he was able to get Keanu Reeves attached. That's how he was able to get him attached for so little. That's how they were able to do John Wick on the shoestring budget that they did, but it ended up being a phenomenal success. So the big thing about the VFX that people talk about with this film are the bullet time shots. They do it a couple times. They do it with Trinity in the beginning, and then they do it in a slightly more complex way with Neo at the end. This is basically an entirely new method that they developed, where on a green screen they set up a row of hundreds of DSLR cameras that essentially go down in a spiral like this, and then they would have Keanu Reeves in the center on wires. All of these cameras would fire off in a really fast row. It looks amazing. I think it still holds up really well. They tried to do something similar, but with all CGI in the second and the third film. I'm getting ahead of myself, but we're definitely going to talk about how they did bullet time in The Matrix 2 and 3. This film had a budget of about $63 million and it grossed around $465 million. It was a breakaway success. It really helped jettison the careers of people like Keanu Reeves into that A-tier status, and it was seen as groundbreaking. I remember how vivid and tangible the excitement was over this film with its release. The Matrix earned an 88% on Rotten Tomatoes with an 85% audience score. That is pretty overwhelmingly positive. The critic consensus states, thanks to the Wachowskis' imaginative vision, The Matrix is a smartly crafted combination of spectacular action and groundbreaking special effects. People praise the tightness of the story as well as its sometimes philosophical inclinations, its immediate impact on pop culture and subsequent spoofing, its bombacity, the futurist cyberpunk aspect that we sometimes get. The Matrix was essentially branded as a sci-fi Hall of Famer, and therein lies a little bit of the problem. It's true that this film was so well received and it was so groundbreaking and people loved it so much. Part of the problem with that is you've got a lot to live up to with the sequel. You know, I saw this film when I was 9 or 10 when it came out, and I absolutely loved it. Even as a little kid, I thought it was something really different. I thought it was really, really interesting, and I was so hyped when they announced that they were going to do the sequels. I also remember there was a lot of false rumors over what the sequels would have in them. I remember one of my friends telling me that in The Matrix 2, the agents are able to turn into animals, and then in The Matrix 3, the agents would be able to transform into feelings. Neither of those things happens in The Matrix 2 and 3, but a lot of things do happen, some of which are clearer and easier to explain than the others. So, let's talk about The Matrix Reloaded. The Matrix Reloaded. This is such a contentious film. I think this one is really love it or hate it. Full disclosure, I love this film. I love this film. I love a lot about this film. I absolutely understand its shortcomings, and we are going to talk about those, but The Matrix Reloaded does a lot of things that I think stay very true to the nature of the universe while organically expanding upon it. In the first film, we never saw Zion at all. I think it's fascinating to see it here. It makes me want to know more about the universe. I like the lived-in feeling. I also love the contrast of the citizens of Zion when they're actually in the city versus when they're plugged into the Matrix. This actually kind of makes sense for why they dress so well and stylistically and intricately when they're inside the Matrix. They are never gonna get to wear clothes like that in the real world. The Matrix Reloaded received a 73% on Rotten Tomatoes with an audience score of 72. So both the audience score and the critical consensus are evenly matched. Something that's either a 72 or a 73 is considered generally positive, sometimes with a bit of a skew towards mixed. And I will say, from everyone that I've talked to, reception to this film is overall mixed. The critical consensus for The Matrix Reloaded states, though its heady themes are a departure from its predecessor, The Matrix Reloaded is a worthy sequel packed with popcorn-friendly thrills. Now, I definitely agree with it being a worthy sequel with popcorn-friendly thrills, though I do disagree with the assertion that its themes are too much of a departure from the first one. Now, there is a lot of philosophical and theological discourse about The Matrix as a franchise, and arguably, there might be a little bit less so in the first one, but I think the themes are all still there. I will concede that some of it is overly complicated, especially in the overuse of very languid language from the architect.
You have many questions, and though the process has altered your consciousness, you remain irrevocably human. Concurrently, while your first question may be the most pertinent, while it remains a burden assiduously avoided, it is not unexpected and thus not beyond a measure of control, thus creating the otherwise contradictory systemic anomaly.
I love this film, but I've also seen it a lot of times, so I feel like I understand it on a level that does require multiple viewings of the whole franchise, and some of it's just too complicated. The Matrix Reloaded boasts 1,227 VFX shots, which is quite a lot compared to the paltry 200 of the first film. So there were a lot of technological advancements between 1999 and The Matrix Reloaded, which was released in 2002. So for scenes like the Burly Brawl in Matrix Reloaded, entire shots of it are 100% done in the computer. The idea really with this film was to create bullet time inside a computer. In my opinion, I do think that's impressive. They were really one of the first films to do it. A lot of people like to deny The Matrix 2 and 3 from making their own technological and VFX advancements, which I think is definitely unfair. Doing it with these insane camera movements, which is part of the reason that they did it, so the camera could just zip around really fast and really slow and do all these sort of complicated and parallax movements in post. I don't know about you, Neo, as well as the 100 or so Smiths, don't quite look believable enough, and part of that is the uncanny valley. The uncanny valley is specifically talking about the relationship between humans and visually seeing an object that resembles a human and the degree of emotional response that gets from people. When we see full-scale VFX of people, the level of detail within the people's face, it looks pretty real, but we also know that it's fake. This sets something off in our brains that makes us uncomfortable. Look at the Polar Express. The graphics themselves are very well done, but they got a very mixed reaction from people. The highway chase scene is nearly 15 minutes, and honestly, I love it. The highway chase scene is one of the most complicated scenes ever pulled off for a film. I need to express to you how much of this was done practically. They actually built a couple kilometers of a fictional highway in the middle of the desert. The motorcycle stunts for this film are some of the best motorcycle stunts I have ever seen. And it is deeply impressive. I also have to say the song Mona Lisa Overdrive that plays through this whole scene gets me hyped. So there's something that I want to point out to you in the Burly Brawl scene, because it is absolutely a once you see it, you can't unsee it. This is something I really noticed when I started watching the film on Blu-ray. It was my first time watching the franchise in this level of definition, and sometimes that really works against certain films. Keep in mind, I just said that this film has over 1,200 VFX shots. So there's these series of shots of Agent Smith when he's talking to Neo right before the actual brawl begins. I am so surprised that nobody caught this. The closer we go in on Agent Smith's face, the more you can start to see the reflection of everything in his glasses. You can see the camera, you can see the camera crew, you can see the camera track, you can see the lighting, you can see the bounce sheet that they're shooting through. You can just see all these fourth wall breaking things. And at no point did somebody look at this giant image and think, maybe we should use some of our visual effects powers to augment this. No, they would rather dedicate 7 minutes to the Burly Brawl. And I just keep thinking, as fun as it is to watch him battle all these guys, the more I've watched this film, the more I've really started to ask myself, why didn't Neo just pull out some guns and shoot a bunch of these guys? Wouldn't that make this so much easier and faster? It's important to understand, again, with the cultural context, The Matrix came out in 1999, and shortly after this was the Columbine shooting. And the two perpetrators of the Columbine shooting dressed quite similarly to Neo and Trinity in that first Matrix film. From an image perspective, they definitely could not continue with the same kind of wardrobing that they had in the first Matrix films. Showing anything that would have visually reminded people of the Columbine shooting was going to be unacceptable in Hollywood media. The direction that they went in was definitely more cyberpunk, more sci-fi, and absolutely more leather. So they had to make some changes to their outfits, but they also had to make some changes to the way that they depicted weapons. Because they'd established that Neo has all these super Matrix powers now, they decided to opt out of him being a guy who uses a bunch of guns in the second and the third film. And it's true. We actually never see Neo use guns again in the second or the third film because he has all these amazing superpowers. Other people use guns on him, but they're essentially nothing to him anymore. Another thing that I learned in research for this video essay was I never realized how much the production of these two films was unfortunately surrounded by a few tragedies. As you may know, Gloria Foster, who played the Oracle in the first and the second film, unfortunately passed away, so they recast her in the third. What you may not know is that Aaliyah was actually cast as Z for The Matrix 2 and 3, and they had shot several scenes with her.
She just was such an illuminating presence. She just had that attitude of like, I'm getting ready to conquer the world.
Aaliyah was working on both The Matrix as well as Queen of the Damned at the time of her death. With the Queen of the Damned, she had finished filming most of the film, so they were able to complete it. With The Matrix, they had only shot some scenes with her, so she was later recast. It's important to understand the timeline of Aaliyah as well as Gloria Foster passing away because there was also a third event that happened in between these two. In August of 2001, Aaliyah passed away in a plane accident. And then on September 11th, 2001, 9/11 happened. Less than a month later, September 29th, 2001, Gloria Foster passed away. This was undoubtedly a very tough time for cast and crew, and you can even hear them talking about it in some of the behind the scenes.
That was a tough time. It was Aaliyah dying and September 11th, and then Gloria dying. I really didn't think I could take any more grief.
To be honest, I think it's quite commendable that they were able to put together the films that they were, considering the tragedy of everything that had happened at that time, The Matrix Reloaded was made from an estimated budget of $127 to $150 million. The film made $741 million worldwide, breaking the record for Terminator 2 and becoming the highest grossing R-rated film in the world until Deadpool came along. At the end of Matrix Reloaded, Neo meets a program referred to as the Architect. There is a very large revelation in this scene that I think kind of slipped under the radar for some audience members. Now, it is said a lot, and it is said in a few different ways. Let me try and explain this as clearly as possible. The Architect is the embodiment of 01, which is the Machine City. He is a program that designed and created the Matrix. In this scene, Neo learns that the concept of the One is another form of control, that its main function is to assert continued dominance over humanity by 01, the Machine City. The Architect reveals to Neo that his main function now is to return to the source where he will pick a certain amount of men and women from Zion, and these small amount of people will recreate Zion where everybody else will get destroyed. It turns out this is something that the machines have done 5 times before, when Zion has outgrown the Machine City's ability to control them. So essentially, humanity and the machines are stuck in a vicious cycle where they create a version of the Matrix and it works for a short time. But then eventually too many people get unplugged, too many people are awake in the real world, and Zion gets too powerful for 01 to control. So 01 essentially has created this idea of the One. It's a system of control where they tell one person from Zion that they are a prophetic chosen one, and they are given powers within the Matrix that others will never have access to. It turns out that their ultimate function is to continue humanity's survival by essentially killing the majority of Zion. It is a very complicated idea that I don't think this scene communicates very clearly, and this is why maybe some of the more philosophical musings of The Matrix 2 and 3 didn't necessarily sit well with critics and audiences at the time. Neo essentially decides to betray saving Zion and therefore saves Trinity. In doing this, he essentially finds out that he has doomed the Matrix, and now the machines are actually going to follow through with tunneling into Zion and killing everybody. This leads directly into the events of our conclusion. The Matrix Revolutions, definitely the most mixed bag of the 3. I absolutely see the faults within it. I understand how it was a letdown for people who liked the first. I understand how it was also a letdown for people who liked the first and the second. Again, it's a little overcomplicated, and I feel like I only have a good understanding of it because of how many times I've seen it. But it's still quite a pleasurable watch for me, and I actually think it's aged pretty well. The Matrix Revolutions had a critical consensus of 35% and an audience score of about 60. The critical consensus reads, "A disappointing conclusion to the Matrix trilogy, as characters and ideas take a back seat to the special effects." I will agree that the characters in the story take a little bit of a backseat here. A very large majority of the film is dedicated to the battle at Zion. I don't have a problem with this. Yes, it's fun to watch people do kung fu and jujitsu and all sorts of fun wire work in the first and the second Matrix film, but with the third film, it's the gritty real world. Real machines in the real world are drilling down into Zion where they are eviscerating humanity in a very real way. The way that it's done, I think, looks amazing. You might not be able to tell, but a lot of the destruction was actually done with miniatures. And the thing that I love about miniatures in action movies is they spend hours and hours and hours building these beautiful, beautiful structures just to blow them up. Maybe I'm in the minority on this one, but I thought a lot of the side characters in Matrix 2 and 3 were really engaging and really interesting. I sympathized with their stories. I wanted to know what was going on with them. I didn't just want to see what was up with Trinity and Neo. I wanted to see the full picture, and I feel like I got what I wanted. I've asked myself a lot why people didn't really connect with the second and the third film in the way that people did with the first. There's a lot of reasons that we could point to this, whether it's the over-reliance on visual effects, the theological and philosophical musings that might have been a little bit alienating for average audience members. Maybe it was that the second and the third felt bloated for some people. There's lots of reasons we could point to. Let's not linger on it. But one that I really think about is one that doesn't sit well with me either. And as much as I love Matrix 2 and 3, this is a huge fault of the sequels. We have to talk about the depersonalization of Neo. Part of the reason the first film is so easy to connect with is it has a very conventional Hollywood plot. Regular everyday man gets the call to action to be something greater. He finds out that he is a prophet destined to save the world. It's a great story, it's a classic, it works really, really well. It works so well in the first film because Neo is, aside from the fact that he's a hacker, a pretty normal guy. Occasionally he goes out and he parties, even if he has no fun. He gets chewed out by his boss. He smiles. Occasionally he quips. He is seeing things for the first time in the way that we are seeing things for the first time, so it's fun to experience things through his eyes. However, in the second and the third film, Neo just already seems like this monolithic god whose humanity has been kind of zapped by his oneness. In the second and the third film, Neo doesn't really smile. Neo seems oddly unsurprised by a lot of things.
Surprised to see me?
No.
And he just comes off as a cold lead. The most human moment that we get in the second and the third film is Trinity's death scene, and I think that it is so well done. It is handled with just the right amount of sensitivity, it's not overdone, it's very emotional, and it really, really shows us something that we need to see from Neo. It's sort of just like what I said with Katniss in the later Hunger Games movies. I'm sure that there's a lot going through Neo's head, but whatever it is that Neo is thinking, we are often not privy to it. So here's how the film ends. I'll try to explain this as clearly as possible. Agent Smith has completely overtaken the Matrix. Because he can take any person plugged in and turn them into one of his clones, he has now successfully done this with what I will guess is every single person plugged into the Matrix. Neo heads to 01, the Machine City, where he confronts this interface, which has a spiky baby's face, which I gotta admit, I love. It's so weird and so out there and so cyberpunk, and I'm like super here for it. It's this big Buddha-like baby face that speaks in this deep voice. I love it. It's great. But Neo confronts the interface and says, listen, Smith has gotten out of control. He has overtaken the Matrix. He's going to kill all the humans. He's going to kill all the machines. There is nothing you can do, but if you plug me in, I will take him down, and we will save the Matrix and humanity. Neo recognizes that because Smith has taken over the Oracle, Neo has to let himself get corrupted by Smith. 01 injects a program into Neo that once he is corrupted and absorbed by Smith, will essentially corrupt all of the Smiths, allowing them to reboot the Matrix. Get it? Does that make sense? I know that it's hard to explain, but essentially Neo and the Machine City work together to stop Agent Smith. They succeed. Neo unfortunately dies in the process, but Zion is saved. Little Easter egg here, when the Oracle is sitting on the park bench at the end, you'll actually see the plaque is made out to Thomas Anderson. The Matrix Revolution was made for a similar budget of the second film, roughly $110 to $150 million. But whereas the last one grossed so much money, this one grossed just $427 million. So the film underperformed by about $40 million less than the first one. So we talked about the Matrix Reloaded, and the Matrix Revolutions, but now I want to talk about two pieces of media that people don't talk about enough. First of all, I just want to say, if you are not familiar with the Animatrix and you like the Matrix movies at all, you need to watch the Animatrix. 100% The Animatrix is my favorite film across the entire series. It is the perfect blend of everything that you'd want from all of them. The Animatrix is an animated feature film comprised of 9 different shorts that all take place within the Matrix universe. It expands the world as well as lending credence to the backstory. I find it absolutely fascinating. I love that every short within the Animatrix is done by a different animator and director. There's a 2-part short called The Second Renaissance, and this one is one of my favorites because this is actually full stop the entire backstory to what happened between humanity and the machines.
It was not long before seeds of dissent took root. Though loyal and pure, the machines earned no respect from their masters, these strange, endlessly multiplying mammals. B166ER, a name that will never be forgotten.
It's a good backstory. It lends a lot of richness to the Matrix universe. The Final Flight of the Osiris, which is a 3D animated short, is directly connected to the events immediately before Matrix 2.
What is that thing?
Some kind of tunneling machine.
Oh no.
What?
Look where we are. What's 4 kilometers straight down?
Zion.
The Final Flight of the Osiris is essentially a prologue to The Matrix 2, and I definitely recommend it. The other short that directly connects to the films is Kid's Story. Now remember that kind of annoying guy who was always there in the second and the third one? It's basically alleged in the films that Neo and or Trinity helped set him free. This is his backstory, and even if you didn't like his character, if you found him annoying in the second and the third, it's really good in this one. We even have some that are told in different genres like noir, or a more experimental approach. It is honestly the most fascinating entry in the Matrix franchise, and if you like any of the Matrix films, I highly recommend you check out The Animatrix. Enter the Matrix, which was developed for GameCube, PC, PlayStation 2, as well as Xbox, was released in 2003 and is a concurrent story with The Matrix Reloaded, and features over 1 hour of original footage directed by the Wachowskis. There is so many interesting little things that take place in Enter the Matrix. If you're really interested in watching all the back-to-back cutscenes from Enter the Matrix, you can find it on YouTube. It's actually a really interesting watch. I love Jada Pinkett Smith in this. I think it's great that she actually gets to have a leading role in Enter the Matrix. She also has a scene with Persephone, who is absolutely the baddest bee in the Matrix franchise.
If you kiss me, as if you were kissing your true love, I'll tell you where your friend is. How about I shoot you in your kneecaps instead? You're not afraid to kiss a woman, are you?
Enter the Matrix was also just a really entertaining video game for me to play as a kid. I absolutely loved being able to do the bullet time, and I highly recommend it if you are a Matrix aficionado. So in the near 20 years since its original release, cultural and critical perception of the Matrix franchise has actually really warmed up. I do think a lot of people were overly harsh on it at the time, and I certainly think a certain oversaturation of the market caused by releasing 2 and 3 in the same year may have also had a lot to do with this. People barely had time, less than a year, to even process the second film before the third was already out. So both were being watched within a very close time of each other, and I do think that may have hurt the overall perception of the films. The Matrix feels tighter than I think people gave it credit for. I also think the overall direction is good. A lot of the writing is quite smart and ingenious. I do think the acting is overall pretty good, although again, the stoniness of Keanu Reeves in 2 and 3 did hurt the films. Several critics and publications like RogerEbert.com have even gone back and recently reevaluated the series, and their now warmer perception of Reloaded and Revolutions. This has led directly into the future of the franchise.
It is inevitable.
Come on, get out of there.
In 2017, The Hollywood Reporter wrote that Warner Bros. Was working on some kind of a continuation of the Matrix franchise. Naturally, this got a lot of people excited. I'm sure this also had some people iffy. over whether or not a new Matrix could perform well. However, I myself was very excited to learn that Lana Wachowski would be returning as a writer and director, and that Keanu Reeves and Carrie-Anne Moss would be slated to star in the untitled fourth Matrix film. The circumstances of that are highly suspect, since both of their characters did die in the third film. This has led to a lot of speculation over the plot of the untitled fourth Matrix film, which is still super tight-lipped. People don't know if it's a direct sequel to the trilogy. Lawrence Fishburne himself is not returning. Neither is Hugo Weaving, who played Agent Smith. Both of them did express a wanting to return, but for different reasons involving schedule conflicts and such, neither of them were able to return for this film. In the fall of 2020, Keanu Reeves described The Matrix 4 as a beautiful script that is a love story. It's inspiring. He also added, it's another version of a kind of call to wake up, and it has some great action. All will be revealed. Personally, it sounds very exciting. It's also not surprising to me that it would be branded as another love story, as the love story between Neo and Trinity was always a driving force across all three. Neil Patrick Harris, who was announced as a new cast member of The Matrix 4, also said, I think Lana has a great inclusive energy, and her style has shifted visually from what she has done to what she is currently doing. So, according to NPH, we can also expect a bit of a different visual approach with The Matrix. I have to say, I try not to get myself too hyped up with sequels, but I have always been a big lover and a big defender of the Matrix franchise. I am super excited at the idea of a fourth one. Every piece of news that I have heard about it has gotten me really happy and really excited. Except one piece of news that is unfortunate. The Matrix 4 officially wrapped production in Berlin in the fall. Now, due to COVID regulation, Berlin would not allow parties of more than 50 people. As this film was shot in Berlin, that would make the production of The Matrix 4 unable to have a cast and crew party. Perfectly understandable considering the COVID times. Obviously, things like parties may not be possible. However, according to reports, approximately 200 people attended a party scene that was being shot for The Matrix. Now, you're not allowed to throw a party of over 50 people because of COVID regulations. However, the exception to that is if it's a scene for a movie. You follow? Warner Bros. Stands by their claim that it was not, in fact, a party, but rather a celebration scene, and the film is still slated for release in December of this year, 2021. This personally has me excited because if it's March right now and the film's coming out December, we should be expecting a teaser trailer anytime now. This is one of those franchises with a mixed legacy where I am very interested to see how they can continue it. I do think people were overly harsh towards the trilogy at the time. I also think that feelings have skewed more towards the positive in the last few years. However, it can't be denied that there is still absolutely an appetite for this content with the release of Matrix 4. But what about you? Let me know in the comments. Are you going to go see Matrix 4 in theaters? Are we going to be able to see stuff in theaters in December? I don't know. I certainly hope so. But I know that if it is possible, I will be there right in the front. How about you? I hope you enjoyed this video. I hope I was able to point out some interesting facts about The Matrix. I hope I was able to make some people aware of some of the lesser known pieces of media from The Matrix. If you haven't subscribed yet, I highly suggest that you do. I make new videos every week. I also like to put up polls where I ask people what franchises did they want to see me do next. So let me know in the comments, what franchises do you want to see me do? Until my next video, I hope you all have a good week. I hope you get some rest. I hope you have some fun. I know I will be, and I will see you all here next Thursday. Bye. Look at the Polar Express. The graphics themselves are very well done, but they got a very mixed reaction from people, quite a polarizing reaction. That joke made itself. That's not my fault. That's not my fault.